Hello, and welcome to the Pikku Kimalainen knitting podcast. My name is Rachel Manyama, and I'm obviously the host. This is obviously a podcast about knitting, but I also sew, so I'll include some sewing bits and pieces here and there. I don't sew as much as I knit. I find knitting a lot more of an organic process that is easier for me to go through rather than sewing, where if you cut out a piece of fabric you automatically waste materials if you mess up. But anyways, I recently moved down to the Nashville, Tennessee area, and it is a lot different here from where I used to live up in Montana. It's a lot warmer, and I'm sort of struggling with the change in climate, and I'm missing the colder temperatures. I'm a person that runs very warm, so even in the winter sometimes up in Montana it's difficult for me to wear hand knit garments made out of 100% wool. So it's definitely a lot more difficult for me here to enjoy my garments in that sense. So I thought I might as well make a podcast and talk about my hand knit garments extensively if I cannot wear them for the time being. This move is temporary, but I'm really missing Montana right now. So I guess I'll jump right into finished objects. I have quite a few of them because this is my first episode. So I think the first one that I'll start off with is a sweater that I knit for my boyfriend for his birthday. It is the Rebel Alliance sweater by Natalie Meredith. This is it. It's a bottom-up construction. I tend to prefer top-down. It's just easier for me because there's less seaming. Although seams do provide a little bit extra support. And it's just a simple colorwork sweater. I knit this out of Cascade 220, which is a superwash yarn. It's very affordable, and it's the first time that I had ever knit with that yarn. And I gotta say, I don't think I'm going to knit with it ever again until... I'm not going to knit with it once I've knit up the rest of the scraps from this blanket, but my color work is a bit lumpy. I'm still a bit new at this. But he loves it. I think I might adjust the collar just slightly because it is kind of big, and he likes really tight sort of crew neck collars. So do I. And the one problem I tend to have with hand knit sweaters is I always make the collars a little bit too big. So I'm working on that. But the reason I did not like Cascade 220 is not only is it a superwash yarn, but when I was blocking it, it was shedding quite a bit. It reminded me of my cat Junior. I left him up in Montana, but whenever I put lotion on my face, he'd always really love the smell. I get the Palmer's coconut butter lotion, and he always knew when I was going to put it on my face. He could smell it, so he'd come up and like try to rub up against my face, and he'd leave like this beard on me. I would try to stay away from him, but he'd always get hair stuck to my face because of that lotion. And that's what it kind of reminded me of when I was blocking this out. When I ran my hand across it when it was wet, it was just shedding a ton. And it was messy, it was gross. And I think I got rid of everything that was shedding off of it, but still it really put me off. I think it is really great yarn if you're sensitive to wool My boyfriend definitely is a bit more sensitive than I am to wool. So this was a fantastic knit for him, and he loves it, but he can't really wear it because it's too hot down here. Maybe he could wear it as a jacket for like 2 hours in the morning, but yeah. I definitely see myself knitting Natalie Meredith's patterns, more of her patterns in the future. She has a woman's version of a Star Wars sweater. It has the Death Star on it and lightsabers on the sleeves. And it just looks so neat. I think I might modify it to make it more masculine so my boyfriend can wear it. I do see him wearing that kind of sweater a lot more than me. I'm a bit more plain when it comes to my clothing choices. I guess just in color and design, I really love simple things. But I think I might try to find a glow-in-the-dark yarn and knit a glow-in-the-dark sweater. I'm not sure how that will work out, but I think that'd be really neat for maybe next year's Star Wars sweater. So, I did have some troubles with the pattern. There are a few spots where I didn't quite understand what she was asking me to do, so I knit from the chart. When you're knitting from the chart, you can easily see where the decreases are and where you start the collar. But she did add an update to the PDF where she sort of clarified a bit more or worded her her directions a bit better, and that definitely cleared up a lot of things. I know I made a few mistakes on the sweater, and Cascade 220 in the lighter colors, it really doesn't give you a lot of leeway when it comes to mistakes. Like, I messed up around the collar and I tried to duplicate stitch the error away, and in a hand knit, in a hand spun yarn or more rustic yarn, you might not notice it, but with this yarn the stitch definition is crazy, so you're going to notice that. I'm hoping it fuzzes out a bit more. I was actually going to re-knit this because I was so disappointed, but I saw my boyfriend wear it after like hiding it for 2 weeks, and it's not that bad actually. One thing I am noticing with this yarn is it's pilling like crazy, and again that sort of goes back to the shedding I was experiencing when I first blocked it. I don't know if you can see those pills. You can sort of see the fuzz right there. It's pilling a lot around the underarms. I didn't finish the color work on that, I still gotta go over it. But I think I'm going to add faux leather patches on the elbows so you don't notice that too much. And I think it will all work out. I'm praying it does. But yeah. So that is my Rebel Alliance sweater. It got caught on my pins. The next finished object I have to show is a shawl. And initially this doesn't look like too much, it just looks like a triangle shawl, you know. But the special thing about this is it is an illusion shawl, or it's a shawl knit with the technique of illusion knitting. This pattern is by Steve Plummer. Sorry if I keep looking over there at my notes. I think putting my notes up front would be a bit better. This pattern is by Steve Plummer, and he has a ton of patterns on Ravelry that use the technique of illusion knitting. I'm pretty sure that's almost all of his patterns. But I just love this technique. So when you view it from the front, you just see these lines. I can't remember which yarn I used. That's going to be a common theme in the first episode. I never really thought about keeping track of my yarn until I wanted to start a podcast. But once you tilt it to the side, you'll see an image appear. And so if you haven't already guessed, this is a portrait of Severus Snape. Or Alan Rickman. I had started the shawl when I heard about Alan Rickman's passing. He was one of my favorite actors, and I was really sad to find out that news. So I wanted to sort of make something to remind me of him, commemorate him. I don't know. This is just a weird little personal thing that I did. But it's an amazing shawl. It is primarily garter stitch. And the amazing thing about garter stitch is it is incredibly squishy and has a lot of memory. So once you stretch it, it just sort of pops back. And that makes it great for really, really cold days because you can stretch it over your neck and get a really tight, tight fit without it, you know, losing its shape. It bounces back and sort of hugs you, and it's a really, really cozy knit. Initially, I didn't think that I would wear this shawl just because the stripes are very graphic, but I think because I used sort of a less contrasty color with the black, other than it being white, I used tan, it toned it down a bit more, and I actually really, really love the look of this shawl now. I wear it. This is probably one of my most worn shawls ever, and I've only knit a few of them. I'm more into garment knitting, but I love this thing, and it's amazing going out in public and somebody commenting on it and being interested in then and then you can sort of show them the magic trick that it does, and that just blows everyone away. And it makes me happy because it gets more people interested in knitting. I think everyone should knit. It's an amazing skill to have. But so I guess I'll show you how illusion knitting works. I'm not giving too much away about the pattern because it is it's not quite a complicated pattern, it's just really tedious to knit out. There's a lot of counting even though you're only knitting purl stitches and knit stitches. But so the shawl starts out with just garter stitch, and if you're familiar with garter stitch, it creates ridges. And each ridge is knit in a different color. So here's a black ridge and here's a tan ridge. And as you go along the shawl, you'll notice that there will start to be these gaps of stockinette stitch, but those garter ridges will stand out. So once you turn it to the side, the main color that is knit in the garter stitch will sort of, you know, pop out and hide the contrasting color that is in the stockinette stitch. So I hope I'm explaining that okay. So as you sort of mix up these two stitch patterns and have some ridges pop out in the darker color and some ridges pop out in the lighter color, you can create images. And so in this case, it was just Alan Rickman's face. So once I turn it to the side, that is the black garter stitch that you're seeing right here. And then where you see the lighter colors, that is the light garter stitch poking out. And where the black is, the lighter color is knit in stockinette stitch. And where the dark is that's being hidden, that's also knit in stockinette stitch. But I just love this thing so much. He has a lot of Harry Potter themed patterns. I know I saw a shawl with Hagrid's face on it, and he added a ton of fringe to the shawl, which I thought was perfect. It reminded me of his big billowing beard and hair. But I don't think I'd knit that just because I already have an illusion shawl. But I am considering knitting maybe one of his wall hangings. He does have a lot of classic pieces of art that he has translated into the illusion knitting technique, such as the Mona Lisa, and I'm blanking on everything else. He's also knit up the Beatles and a ton of other actors and really neat images. I'll leave a link to his Ravelry page down below. But yeah, this is just an amazing technique, and it blows me away every time I like look at this shawl. The things you can do with knitting is, there's no words for it. I think it's just amazing. That's all I think about it. So, the next finished objects I have to show are just some socks. So I've knit up quite a few pairs of socks in this year, and gifted quite a few pairs away. I'm really going through this transitional period with sort of adapting my crafting lifestyle to a more minimalistic lifestyle, and I'm gifting away a lot of hand knit pieces that are just way too colorful or crazy for me and don't bring me as much joy as I wish they would. So this year has been all about just getting rid of everything that stresses me out and only keeping the things that spark happiness and joy. And this little pile of socks definitely does that. So these are the only socks I own right now. Oh, that's a work in progress, ignore that. These are the only pairs of socks that I own right now that are hand knit. I'm trying to cycle through all of my commercially made socks as they wear out and knit a hand knit pair to replace them. And I'm getting there. I almost have 7 pairs, which is my goal for the end of the year, to have at least 7 pairs of hand knit socks. And I'm almost there. I think I have 2 other pairs of socks in the works, and then I just need 1 more. But yeah, they're all very neutral colored, which makes me happy. So the first pair of socks that I kept for myself this year, I did knit them this year, are my Jason Funderburger socks. And I have to apologize, I can't find the pattern anywhere on Ravelry. I think it might have been taken down. I know I had it in my library and favorites, but I can't find it anywhere. I can't find it in my downloaded files on my phone. So this is like a mystery pattern for me, but it's a really, really lovely pattern, and I hope it comes back up, or I hope I find it again, because I want to reknit it. But yeah, these are called my Jason Funderburger socks, and they're named after this this little frog character that you see in one of my favorite animations, Over the Garden Wall. And I don't know, just the colors remind me of him. So I had a few little mistakes happen with this pair of socks. It initially asked you to cast on 80 stitches, which is a lot. Although I have knit 100 stitch socks, so I guess it's not that bad. But it really, really surprised me because it was knit, I think, on US size 1 needles, which in my opinion is quite big for me when I'm knitting an 80 stitch sock, and my foot is quite slim, so it worried me. So I initially took out this little bar right here of 3 stitches on the foot, and I also took out that one on the other side, so it's missing 6 stitches right here. And I had knit up the entire pair of socks. I knit these 2 at a time on 2 different sets of DPNs, and I got up to the cuffs and I tried them on, and I couldn't get the heel over my heel. Like my toe was right here and I couldn't get them on, and so I ripped all the way back down to here before I started the heel and added in those extra 6 stitches. And it fits, it is quite snug, but not as snug as it used to be. It used to sort of like stop my blood flow to my foot. My foot would get quite cold because these were so tight. But after a really good wash, they did loosen up, and now they're just a really nice fitting pair of socks, which I do enjoy. I do wish that I had just gone all the way down to the toe when I ripped them back and re-knit those stitches, added in those 6 stitches down here, because it is quite tight around here still. Like, when I try on this sock or put it on, this motif right here, you can't even see the eyelids. They're just like little eyelids going. They're squinting at me, saying that it wasn't a good idea to wear these. But that's not so much an issue anymore. This is knit out of 100% extra fine merino wool. It is a very high twist, so I wasn't too afraid of knitting up that 100% wool into a sock. Sorry. I did insert some heels and toes with yarn that did have a nylon content in it, so I don't have to worry about holes wearing out around there. In the future I might have to darn like the ball of my foot, and where the heel meets the rest, where the heel with the nylon content meets the rest of the yarn, I might have to darn there. But so far they've been wearing really well. I know I've worn them to work. At my job I walk around a lot. I'm on my feet 24/7, and these haven't really felt it at all, which makes me sad I didn't keep track of the yarn, because I would really like to purchase more of it. But I'll keep my eyes peeled for similar looking skeins whenever I go out and shop for yarn. Another thing about these socks is you can see sort of how the difference in gauge. Like when I added in those extra 6 stitches, you no longer got this pulling. So you can see it pulls a lot around my foot, and then it sort of evens out once I added in those extra stitches. And that's another reason why I kind of am kicking myself for not frogging all the way back down to the toe. But I guess no one's going to see that pulling, because it's only really noticeable on the bottom of the sock where the stockinette stitch is, and they'll mostly be covered up with shoes. But I'm still kind of sad about that. I'm not used to talking this much. So the next pair of socks that I finished for myself this year is a simple pair of Mercury socks. This is knit out of Knit Picks Stroll Tweed. I think this is their oyster colorway. It's sort of a creamy color that has almost like a pinkish aura to it. Although there's no pink in it, it just reminds me of sort of a flush skin tone, even though it's paler than me. But I really love this yarn. I don't really like some of Knit Picks Stroll Sock Yarn Tweed colorways in their darker colors, just because the tweed isn't, I don't think, that well incorporated into the yarn, which I think it might just have something to do with the process of how they make the yarn. But here you don't really notice it. You get those dark specks, and it has an overall, you know, even tweedy look. But on some of the darker tweed pieces that I've knit in, like Welly's Heather, I think, it just sort of looks like you dropped your sweater or your socks on the floor and they picked up dust bunnies, which I'm not too crazy about that look. I don't know about you guys. But I cast on using the German Twisted cast on in a contrast color. I wanted to add a little bit of fun into the sock. I wear these with my Oxfords sometimes, and so I don't want like a contrasting heel to be like playing peekaboo with people looking at my feet. It just keeping the heels and toes in the same color just sort of helps it look a bit more uniform. Although I do add a lot of contrasting heels and toes on my socks because I wear boots more often than Oxfords, but this was sort of a fancy lacy pair, so I just decided to do that last minute. I really love the Mercury sock pattern. I see myself knitting up another pair of Mercury socks maybe in another 3 socks time. Like, in the amount of time it takes me to finish 3 more pairs of socks, I'll cast on another pair of Mercury socks. So the next pair of socks that I knit up was knit in participation with Amy's Christmas sock knit along from the Stranded podcast. This is the Heilstad sock pattern. I can't remember who it is by, but I'll put it in the show notes and on the screen. But it is quite a lovely stitch pattern. So the original pattern, I believe it only has you do 2 repeats of these trees. And it doesn't have this little band of color work down here. So you get 2 repeats of these trees here, and then I think the color work band down by the toe. Or maybe it's underneath the trees. I don't remember. But I wanted an all-over colorwork sock. I love colorwork. To me, it's making colorwork socks is almost like buying self-striping sock yarn. I'm not really a fan of self-striping sock yarn, or particularly plain stockinette stitch socks. I have to have something interesting in there. Even simple textures can bore me sometimes, but colorwork socks, it's just like doodling for me. I love it so much, and even if you like lose your place, you can always look at the stitch pattern and sort of guess and see what row you're working on, because the chart is pretty much right there. Plain as day. But I used just another Knit Picks Stroll Tweed sock yarn. I'm trying to knit that all out of my stash at the moment. I'm trying to decrease my stash to just having scraps so I can work on more colorwork socks and and just have that all knit up and have a totally clean, fresh slate to knit from. So on the heels, this is one of my favorite details on the sock. I found a chart from the Chocolate Mousse sock pattern on Ravelry. It is a free download. I think it has like hoof tracks on the rest of the body of the sock, but it has this really, really cute moose on the heel, standing amongst snowflakes. And so I did a little bit of tweaking to each pattern to get that chart on the heel, and I think it worked out very well. The heel, I didn't add any slip stitches to the heel since it was going to be reinforced by the floats. And as you can see, that's already felted in a little bit so the floats aren't, you know, sliding around. But this is what the inside of the sock looks like. It's I'm always interested at seeing people's floats. But I carried the stitches along even on the bottom of the heel, just so it was consistent and you didn't have a little patch of fabric that didn't have the color work on it and therefore didn't have those reinforcing floats. And I didn't really worry about the toe. I just stopped the color work at the toe and then wove in the ends and made the toe. I think I might have to go back, however, and make the toe a bit shorter. I have been knitting my toes quite pointy, so that they sort of conform and fit to my foot, because I've got quite long toes. But I'm finding that sort of makes the fabric look crooked, so I think I might add a few more decreases to one side just so it better fits my foot without, you know, sort of shifting that toe to the side so it doesn't look like that. The white contrasting color was knit out of Valkyrie Fibers yarn. I believe this is her sand dollar colorway, and it's on a lovely stellina base. It's really Christmassy, but not too Christmassy. So I do see myself wearing this all year. I'm the kind of person that I don't excessively decorate for any holiday. I might like switch out a plant or add in whatever that is. That's a little Christmassy. It's around the time, right? But if I find something I like, I'll just have it up all year. I have a porcelain pumpkin sitting on my nightstand that holds all of my bobby pins and stuff, and that's up all year, even though it's not like around Halloween or Thanksgiving anymore. So the last pair of socks that I knit for myself is just a simple pair of stockinette stitched socks. So I started these when my car broke down. It's fixed now, and it didn't cost too much, which is nice, and it passed emissions. I never had to go through emissions before, so there are quite a few things that we had to tweak at the mechanics just to get it to pass so I could get my new license plates. But that whole junk is over with. But I was pretty stressed out at that time, and I had to get Ubers, and they're always trying to talk to me, and I don't like talking to strangers that much. I don't like going out in public, so getting an Uber was kind of weird. So I knit on these socks on the rides to and from work, and I knit these up pretty fast. I knit these up in like 3 days time. And I held it double with sewing thread because this is, again, 100% extra fine merino yarn. It is, I believe, the same base as my Jason Funderburger socks. I dyed this black because it was a sort of neon-y bluish color, and you can still see little tinges of the color in the sock, but it's not as noticeable now. It was a yarn gifted to me by my boyfriend on Christmas, and last year's Christmas, and I felt bad I wasn't knitting with it. The colors weren't making me excited. So I dyed it black, and now this is like his pair of work socks. This is by far the best pair of socks that I think I've knit so far. They fit amazingly. They're of a toe-up construction, and I just did a German short row heel in garter stitch. And initially I was a little bit worried because garter stitch in fingering weight yarn, it opens up a bit more. So I was seeing my skin through the garter stitch, and I thought that wasn't good. But if it'll focus. Okay, there we go. But it did felt up quite a bit, and just enough to where you don't see your skin through that garter stitch anymore, but the heel is still quite malleable. I know that when fabrics get felted up, they tend to lose their stretch, but these heels are still quite stretchy and have a lot of give while bouncing back, and I haven't had any issues with these socks yet, although I have to say I don't think I did that well on dyeing this yarn black. I used acid dyes, and I don't think I set it in correctly because this sock is bleeding a lot. When I was knitting with it, the yarn was breaking, There's no dye on my finger right now. My finger just always has that line through it because I knit a lot. But I had a little like black line on my finger when I was knitting up these socks, and whenever I wash them, they have only been washed twice, but the water was quite murky and dark. So I'm hoping after a few more washes, all of the excess dye will have bled out. But it's not affecting the color of the thread or the color of the toe in any way, just because you don't have that heat and acidity, you know, sort of setting the dye in. So when I wash them and I see that all of the fabric is black, I'm not too worried. I just give them a rinse and squeeze out that extra dye, and they look like the original product. But yeah, I do see, even though I don't like stockinette stitch that much, I do see a lot more stockinette stitch socks in this sort of heathered fabric. I do see a lot of those socks in my future because I'm trying to go through all of my sock yarns quite fast and and knit down my stash and you know, sort of get these work socks out so I can wear my hand knit socks to work, and get rid of my commercially made socks because they are getting a few holes in them. The next finished object I have to show you is sort of a work in progress. They're sitting over here, and they're little mountain plushies. So the reason I say that they're sort of a work in progress is because I'm hoping to knit up enough of them to eventually have a whole mountainside on maybe a couch or a chair or just on the floor. I don't know where I'm going to put these, but this is all of the ones that I've knit up so far. They're so stinking cute. But I have been considering publishing a pattern for these guys. I have seen some similar patterns on Ravelry, but they aren't quite similar in construction or look. So I think it would be a really nice first sort of pattern writing project for me because I am interested in designing knitwear. I do already do a lot of that at home, just in my head, and you know, knitting and adjusting certain projects, but I'm not really good at writing down directions, and I can't really sell patterns if I can't write them. So I think this would be a good test run to make sure that what I'm writing down isn't gibberish. I can have test knitters and this pattern will just be free and I can get feedback. But it's a very similar construction to bottom-up sweater construction, but they're so cute. These guys, this is probably my most favorite mountain plushie so far, just because they're just two chubby little men. I don't know. But this was knit out of a reclaimed yarn from a sweater that I found at the thrift shop that had a couple holes in it. The yarn was from Italy. It said handmade in Italy. Maybe the yarn wasn't from Italy, but the sweater was definitely knit in Italy, and you could tell it was a very high quality sweater, but it had a hole on the arm, and that's why it was marked down so much and probably why it was donated. This yarn was single ply, and I dyed it gray so I could use it in this project. You do see a few little streaks of pink in there, but that's what this guy looks like. I'll show you the others. This was also knit out of that yarn that I had rescued from that sweater. This was actually the first mountain pillow that I had ever knit. However, the first mountain pillow is sort of encased in this second skin. I had originally knit the first mountain pillow for my boyfriend, and I was so lazy I just knit one side and then added a backing from a sweater. You can kind of see the difference in shape, like where it poofs out a bit more, that's where the sweater backing is. And it was knit out of acrylic yarn and I just couldn't look at it. But I knew my boyfriend didn't want me to throw it away because it was special to him. He keeps more what do you call those, sentimental objects than I do. If I don't use something within 2 weeks, it's going and it's out of here. So I thought, well, if I don't like it, if I don't like looking at it, I might as well knit a cover for it that I do like, and he still kind of has that little memory. This was knit from scraps of a sweater, one of my first sweaters that I had ever knit. I did donate that sweater because it turned out a bit too small for me. So I'm hoping that maybe somebody found it in the kids section and their kid has a nice hand knit sweater. But yep, the yarn is very heathered. I don't know, I did the decreases a little bit weird, so he's kind of got little feet. It's like he's gonna run away. So the little snow caps are knit on with duplicate stitch, so I still have to go over some of these in a lighter color just so you get a more defined contrast. I don't know when I'll do that. I might never get to doing it. And the last guy, I'm going to have to restuff him just because the stuffing has settled. He's kind of droopy. But these mountains are very tall. This was also knit from thrifted yarn, however it was not from the reclaimed sweater. I found this hand spun yarn at the thrift shop, and I say that it's hand spun just because it was very, very uneven. And I do know that commercially produced yarns, such as art yarns that you find at Joann's Fabrics, they can have a sort of thick and thin texture for craft projects or whatever, but this one was thick and thin, but it still wasn't as uniform as a commercially produced yarn. And you could just tell that this was 100% wool. So yeah, I also dyed this one. It has a very beautiful heathered look, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be keeping all these pillows. Once I knit a whole mountain range, I might sell them on Etsy or gift them away. I'm not sure, but right now they're bringing me a lot of happiness, so they can stick around and be in my personal space. I don't mind. But that's it for finished objects. Now on to works in progress. So I don't think I have that many works in progress. I have 5, however, one of them is pretty much finished. I've just got to make some adjustments. And that project that I'm talking about is this sweater. This is the Tracy sweater by Noragon. And the pattern was free on Ravelry. I made some adjustments so it had a garter stitch shoulder. And I just left out the sleeve shaping, the arm shaping, because I wanted a drop sleeve. And that aspect of the sweater I really do enjoy. However, I was aiming for a bit more of a boat neck sweater. I do have a lot of really beautiful blouses, and there's embroidery sort of on this shoulder area, and I think they look very beautiful with slightly more open sweaters. And also it sort of helps with temperature regulation since it is a sweater and I'm not going to be taking it on and off like a cardigan. So I did not include this one pattern repeat to go over the shoulder. I stopped the neckline right there and then added in the collar. However, that it made it a little too wide. So if you look here, it's almost slipping over my shoulders. And that is what it's doing. I have been wearing it quite a bit just to see how the yarn will settle. I have blocked it out. However, this just keeps stretching and stretching and stretching, and I know that it's stressing me out. So I'm going to pick up these stitches, and I don't think I'm going to rip all the way back, but I'll pick up the stitches with size 3 needles and probably add in some decreases. But this sweater is incredibly chunky and large, and I've actually considered adding in a sort of collar, a bigger, you know, poofier, chunkier turtleneck, just because I do have these mistakes around the neckline. And I think it will fit the overall feel of the sweater. It is quite large. I don't have to worry about my butt showing when I wear leggings. I don't like wearing leggings unless I'm wearing a long shirt or sweater. And I also have to re-knit the bottom ribbing. It's just a little too loose for me. So I'm going to cut right here, pick up stitches, and re-knit the ribbing in a size 3 needle. I believe I knit this on size 6 needles, US size 6. And it created a really lovely, squishy, not too heavy, not too light fabric. However, going down to size 5 needles just wasn't enough to get the tight enough ribbing that I wanted. And I didn't want the ribbing to be too tight. I didn't want it to look like a mushroom because it was when it flips up, but I wanted it to just sort of draw in the sweater a bit. So overall, I'm very happy with this sweater. I'm just going to have to make those adjustments sometime, maybe next week. I knit this with 2 yarns held double. The first yarn, I don't know the name of. It's just a simple, I don't know, Aran weight yarn? No, probably DK weight. And I held it double with a fingering weight sock yarn. It was brown. I just wanted a bit more of a very subtle heathery look to give it a more rustic feel. I am very attracted to rustic yarns. However, I don't know why I haven't been purchasing them more. Or when I do knit with rustic yarns, I'll give away the knit object. I don't know why I do that. So I'm really trying to focus on building up my wardrobe, which I think so far is going really well. I have to keep remembering to not give things away. However, I have been doing some gift knitting. But the Tracy sweater by Norgon, the back is in a textured pattern, but I knit the chart on both sides because what originally attracted me to this sweater was the beautiful cable chart in the center. And I knew I had to knit this as soon as I saw it. I found my yarn and I cast on right away. I can't remember what weight of yarn it calls for. I just adjusted as needed because I knew I was going to knit it a slightly oversized, so I didn't mind if it was a little baggy or didn't fit gauge. I just knit at the gauge that made me happy. I did knit the smallest size, however my gauge was so different with the type of yarn I was using and the needles I was using that it probably ended up being a size large, somewhere around those lines, but I really love chunky, large, huge, oversized sweaters, so I don't mind. The next work in progress I have to show is a half-finished object. It's another pair of work socks. It's knit in stocking net stitch, and this is one of my hand-dyed yarns. It's a sort of gray yarn with reds and blues added into it, and there's a little bit of striping in there, a little bit of speckle. I love it. However, it does kind of have a lavendery look from a distance. I don't know. So I held it double with a black thread just to make it a bit darker. And so far I'm really loving this sock yarn. I'm using brown yarn for the heels and toes just to make them look a bit more handmade. And I think I cast on the toe last night, but I can't find it anywhere. It's probably in my car. Okay, so the next work in progress is another sock. I cast this on last night, and oh, I've got to stop saying I know that I've already said it a ton so far. And it's not even that I don't know what I want to say, it's just sort of a, there I did it again. It's just something I do. It's like sneezing, I've got to do it. But this sock I cast on last night. It is a simple colorwork sock. And I don't know if I like the color of the orange yarn. This again is Valkyrie fibers in their Freya colorway. And I was initially really attracted to this yarn because the colorway was named Freya, and it looked a bit more, I believe I was under the impression that it was a bit more pink. Here it's a bit more salmon-y pink. And I might frog back on this, at least up to here, and then continue this colorwork motif down to the heel and through the foot, just because I think that's a little too bright for me right here. Although I am thinking about gifting this to my mom. I am sort of stockpiling a ton of little gifts for her that I knit, but I do need work socks, so I might just frog back and make this a sock for me. It is tall enough to show over my boots where the cuff is, but the orange doesn't show. It's a really beautiful color. It's just I'm more attracted to grays and browns and all of those dark colors. And this is a little too out there for me, but it is a really beautiful colorway. I love Valkyrie fibers. This is what it looks like, all caked up. It's again on a sparkle base. I don't know what the base is called, it's just a sparkly Stelina base, and this is part of her Ragnarok series. She got me there. I'm really interested in Norse mythology and Vikings and stuff like that, so as soon as I saw that in my Instagram feed, I went straight to her Etsy shop and ordered some yarn. So I've been trying to knit that up, so I of course knit up her Sand Dollar colorway and her Freya colorway, which were the two yarns that I ordered. I'll order yarn for projects, but that was sort of a impulse buy for me. But yeah, I'm really loving these socks. However, they are really, really bright. So I might put these down for a while and see what I want to do with them. I do think I'm just gonna frog back and continue the colorwork sections and maybe add in some deer and acorns and make them really cute and woodsy looking. I just did a heel flap and gusset, not that that matters because I probably will frog that back. And it's just in another yarn that I over-dyed to make it brown. I think you'll find that I over-dye a ton of yarns to tone them down. And it's just yarn that I get in swaps or is gifted to me and I've got to make it so I want to use it. I'd rather be gifted a yarn and have to over-dye it and use it and love the object rather than not enjoy what I'm knitting because I don't like the color. So I don't think it's really rude to do that to yarn gifts and stuff like that, unless it's indie dyed. Then I hesitate to do that just because I know somebody worked really hard to achieve those colors. So I'll definitely find more projects for that shade of pink. Let's see, so my next work in progress is weaving in a basket. I haven't worked on this for quite a while. It is my Celesterium shawl, and it is a shawl that looks like a chart of the stars in the northern hemisphere. I do believe they also have a chart of the southern hemisphere for this shawl, but I love the north, so I had to go with the northern hemisphere. I'm using these beautiful little teardrop shaped beads for it. And they just have a little hint of blue in them, so when they're on a dark background, it just sort of lights up and is so beautiful. It reminds me sort of mother of pearl, when you open up a shell or something like that, or find a shell. It's very beautiful. So there are, I believe, 4 main sections of the shawl that is the chart, and I've only got done 2 sections of it. And I haven't worked on this for a while because I'm really intimidated by the next 2 sections. Those are the biggest sections. This is a pie shawl, so it's a circular construction, and the next 2 sections, they're huge. So drop stitch. I think I'll pick this back up once I finish knitting up the rest of my stashed yarn. I only really have a basket of it. This is all the yarn I own, and then I have a little scrap yarn basket for my scrap quilts, scrap blankets, and I don't really count that as part of my stash, so I don't feel obliged to knit it up right away. But so in the Celesterium shawl, you start in the middle, as you do with pretty much any pie shawl, and it called for I can't remember what it called for. It called for this really weird cast on I was unfamiliar with. It was like the 4-stitch beaded cast on, and I tried to do this technique over and over again, and it just wasn't working out. I couldn't figure it out. All my stitches were loose, my bead was wiggling around everywhere, and it just didn't look nice. So I just did a little crocheted cast on, and I think it made it look a lot neater. And the way the stars are made in this shawl is you make an eyelet and then put a bead near that eyelet, so then the bead catches the light, which is so clever. I just love it so much, and I can't imagine the math that went into this to like create a mostly accurate representation of the northern hemisphere. I am using Madeline Tosh Merino Light in their Void colorway. I accidentally got Tosh Merino Light, but I meant to get one of their sock bases. So this is a single ply yarn, but I don't think I'll be too worried about it, since it is a shawl and it's not going to be worn too much. To get the beads on, I'm using the dental floss method because I couldn't find a crochet hook small enough to pull the yarn through the beads. So basically with the dental floss method, you'll take the ladder or the stitch that you want pulled through the bead and sort of thread it through, and then thread the dental floss through the bead and pull the yarn through, and then you'll knit that. It's really simple, and I really prefer that because I don't see a lot more beading in my future, and I don't want to have a ton of crochet hooks that I use once and then never look at again. I really love the Void colorway in this Madeline Tosh yarn because of how the Celesterium shawl is constructed. You're going to get variegated stripes all along the shawl in a circular pattern if you do have a tonal or variegated sock yarn. And I think that looks really, really beautiful and sort of pushes the idea of the northern hemisphere because it looks like a photograph of the sky, like a long exposure photograph of the sky at night. And what happens when you take a long exposure photograph is the camera catches a lot more light. However, the lens is open a bit longer, so it will catch the movements of certain objects. So if you have, say, like a really cheap camera, it might not have, you know, the best quality, and the shutters won't be as fast. I'm sorry, I'm not a really big camera person. I don't know the specifics of it, but when you get those sort of, what do you call it, wavy pictures, it's just because the shutter isn't as fast as other cameras, so you're not getting crisp photos. But if you're maybe taking a picture at nighttime and you want a lot more light to come in so you can see a lot more things, the shutter is going to be a lot slower, so it can let more light in and you can see those objects a bit better. However, if something's moving, you'll see the movement, you'll see it from point A to point B in that one picture. But I think it's so neat, and I'm really excited to continue knitting on this. I'm just intimidated by it. And even though it's a relatively simple knit, the one thing I don't like about simple knits with a lot of stockinette is a lot of counting. And I don't know why I keep selecting projects that require that. With cable charts or colorwork charts or even lace charts, typically you can look at the pattern you are knitting and sort of see where you're at. So if you lose track, it's no big deal. But here, you're on your own. If you mess up one little part, it messes up the rest of it. So I think once I get my own place finally, I am in sort of a temporary living situation. Since I recently moved down here, I'll probably pick this back up. But for now, he's just living in this little basket. One thing I really like about this shawl is I get to keep my beads in this jar. And it sort of reminds me of little stars in a jar. I don't know. It just makes me happy. So the last work in progress I have is a color work sweater. Let me find my notes. It's the Bohem sweater, and it is just a simple sweater with a color work yoke. There's not much to talk about right now. I'm knitting it out of Knit Picks, full of the Andes tweed. And I'm using some scrap yarn from a previous project, if I can find it. I had a ball left over from my Rebel Alliance sweater, so I thought it would make a very beautiful contrast color for my yoke. I am making this sweater cropped, just because the sweater was designed to be a tighter fit, but I don't like tight fitting sweaters around my hips. Although I do like tight-fitting sweaters with very little positive ease when they're cropped, because then I can tuck them into a skirt. But not much to talk about here. Right now I'm knitting up the sleeves, and this is as far as I got on the other one. Yeah. I really need to start knitting cardigans, because those are more useful for my wardrobe currently. I don't know why I haven't been knitting cardigans. I've just been casting on a ton of sweaters. But I think that's it for the knitting content. I hope I wasn't too rushed. I definitely kind of feel a bit rushed right now. But I know I'll get used to talking in front of the camera. I don't know if you can hear that, there's a plane outside. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed. I'll definitely have many other topics to talk about, but I figured that since this was my first episode and there's going to be quite a lot of knitting content, it might be more appropriate to save that for future times. But so you can find me on Instagram and Ravelry as Pikku Kimalainen. I'll link it down below because I know the spelling is kind of different. It's not different, it's spelled the way it sounds, but I know some people struggle with spelling certain names like that. I'm not so much active on Ravelry. I mainly go on to Ravelry as an organizational tool for patterns that I want to purchase. I don't really post my finished objects on Ravelry or post my yarn. I do participate in some of the group activities, but for the most part, I'm mostly active on Instagram. I don't know how to end this video.